The dust hadn't settled on Wyatt Hayes' broken heart when a familiar silhouette appeared at his ranch gate. It was his ex-wife's sister, holding a worn leather satchel and the loaded revolver. Lowering the weapon, she whispered the words that would shatter his isolated world. "I came to forgive you both." The Wyoming wind was a relentless beast, howling through the jagged peaks of the Bighorn Mountains and tearing across the desolate plains of the Broken Spur Ranch. Wyatt Hayes leaned heavily against the wooden fence post, his gloved hands gripping the rough timber as he watched the horizon. He was 34, but the deep lines etched around his eyes and the silver creeping into his dark beard made him look a decade older. Solitude had been his only companion for the last 5 years, a deliberate choice after his life had been dismantled piece by piece. He was pulling a rusted nail from the gate hinge when the dog started barking. A cloud of red dust was moving up the southern trail. Wyatt squinted against the glaring afternoon sun, his right hand instinctively dropping to the handle of the Colt revolver resting at his hip. Out here, visitors were rarely a sign of good fortune. As the rider drew closer, the shape of a woman emerged from the settling dust. She was riding a striking chestnut mare, her posture rigid and exhausted. She wore a heavy canvas riding duster, coated in days of trail dirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Wyatt stepped out from the shadow of the solitary oak tree near the gate, his jaw tightening. The woman pulled back on the reins, bringing the mare to a halt just 10 yards away. She slid from the saddle with the stiff, aching movements of someone who had been riding for weeks. When she looked up, pushing the hat back from her forehead, the breath left Wyatt's lungs. It was Abigail Gallagher. She was the mirror image of her younger sister Josephine, yet entirely different. Where Josie had been all flashing smiles, manic energy, and reckless fire, Abigail was quiet, strength, storm-gray eyes, and grounded resilience. But the woman standing before him was not the polished, wealthy ranch heiress he remembered from the fertile valleys of Colorado. Her face was hollowed by grief, her clothes were frayed, and her hands were scarred. In her left hand she gripped a heavy, worn leather satchel. In her right she held a Winchester repeater, the barrel pointed down at the dirt. "Abby," Wyatt said, his voice as coarse as grinding stones. He hadn't spoken another human's name aloud in weeks. Abigail stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked past him, her eyes scanning the dilapidated single-room cabin, the empty corral, and the lean-to shed that barely passed for a barn. Confusion flickered in her sharp gray eyes, followed by a profound, heavy sorrow. She slowly leaned the rifle against the fence post, her shoulders slumping as if a heavy burden had suddenly shifted. "I spent 3 years tracking you down, Wyatt," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Through every whiskey-soaked boomtown and forgotten cattle trail from Denver to Cheyenne. I hated you. I hated you with a fire that burned up everything good I had left." Wyatt remained perfectly still, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You had no reason to come looking for me, Abigail. The past is dead and buried, is it?" She took a step closer, gripping the iron bars of the gate. Tears cut clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "My father died of a stroke a month after you two ran off. The bank foreclosed on the Gallagher estate. I lost my home, my family, my entire life." She took a ragged breath, her knuckles turning white on the gate. "But I didn't come here for vengeance. I'm too tired to carry the hate anymore. I came to forgive you both." Wyatt frowned, the leather of his gloves creaking as he tightened his fists. "Forgive us. You and Josie," Abigail said, her voice breaking. "I know she's in there, Wyatt. I know you two took the trust money. I know you orchestrated the theft of the estate's deeds. But I forgive you. I just need to see my sister. I need to know she's safe, and I need to let this go so I can finally start living again." The Wyoming wind seemed to stop dead. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the nervous snorting of Abigail's mare. Wyatt stepped up to the gate, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her. He looked down into her desperate, pleading eyes, feeling a sick, twisted knot forming in his stomach. "Josie ain't here, Abby," Wyatt said softly, the harshness draining from his voice. Abigail shook her head, a bitter smile touching her cracked lips. "Don't lie to me, Wyatt. Not after everything. Just bring her out." "I'm not lying," Wyatt insisted, unlocking the heavy iron latch and swinging the gate open. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the miserable, rotting cabin. "Search the place. Search the cellar. Search the whole damn property. Josie hasn't been here. I haven't laid eyes on your sister since the night she vanished 5 years ago." Abigail's bitter smile vanished. She stared at the desolate poverty of Wyatt's homestead. There were no stolen riches. There was no hidden fortune. There was only a broken man living on the edge of starvation. "But," Abigail stammered, the satchel slipping from her fingers and hitting the dust with a heavy thud. "But she said you beat her. She said you forced her to steal the bonds. She told the sheriff you took the money and threatened to kill her if she didn't run away with you." Wyatt closed his eyes, a familiar agonizing rage bubbling up in his chest. "Come inside, Abigail. I think we both have a lot of talking to do." The interior of Wyatt's cabin was sparse, smelling of wood smoke, old leather, and bitter chicory coffee. A single cast-iron stove sat in the corner, radiating a weak, desperate heat. Abigail sat at a rough-hewn wooden table, her hands wrapped around a tin mug, shivering despite the warmth. Wyatt sat across from her, staring at the scarred surface of the table. The unspoken history between them hung heavy in the room. Years ago, before Josie's chaotic charm had blinded him, it was Abigail who had first caught Wyatt's eye. They had shared quiet conversations on the Gallagher porch, bonding over their mutual love for the untamed frontier. But Josie had wanted the handsome, rugged cowboy, and what Josie wanted, Josie always got. Wyatt had fallen for the illusion, leaving Abigail to quietly step aside. "The night she left," Wyatt began, his voice low and steady, "she made me a grand dinner. Venison, roasted potatoes, and a bottle of expensive bourbon she claimed she bought in town to celebrate our anniversary. I drank 2 glasses, woke up 36 hours later." Abigail looked up, her gray eyes wide. "When I came to, my head was splitting," Wyatt continued, tracing a knot in the wood with his thumb. "The house was empty. My savings, 5 years of breaking wild mustangs and trailing cattle, were gone from the floorboard safe. But that wasn't the worst of it. She took my signature." "Your signature?" Abigail asked softly. "She forged my name on the deed to my first ranch in the valley. Sold it to a corrupt land baron named Harrison Blake for pennies on the dollar, right out from under me. When I went to the local marshal, he laughed in my face. Said my wife had already warned them I was a violent drunk who gambled away our property." Wyatt let out a hollow laugh. "I left Colorado with nothing but the clothes on my back and the horse I was riding. I've been hiding out here ever since, trying to scrape a living out of the rocks." Abigail sat in stunned silence, her mind struggling to reconcile the horrific narrative she had believed for 5 years with the tragic reality sitting across from her. "She came to the estate 3 days after you supposedly ran away," Abigail whispered, her voice trembling as the memories flooded back. "It was the middle of the night. She was bruised, Wyatt. She had a black eye and a split lip. She fell into my father's arms, sobbing. She said you had gone mad, that you beat her, stole her jewelry, and demanded the deed to the Gallagher estate to cover your gambling debts." Wyatt's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "I never laid a hand on her, Abby. You know me." "I know," Abigail breathed, tears spilling over her lashes. "Looking at you now, seeing this, I know. But my father didn't. He panicked. Josie told him you had hired outlaws to raid the estate. She begged him to liquidate the family trust, to give her the cash so she could flee to the East Coast, where you could never find her. And Arthur gave it to her, Wyatt concluded, piecing the grim puzzle together. Every last cent, Abigail said, a sob catching in her throat. $200,000 in bearer bonds and gold certificates. She packed it into a carriage before dawn. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she loved me, then rode off. A week later, the bank came calling. Our father's debts were suddenly called in by a new owner, Harrison Blake. Wyatt's head snapped up. Blake bought your father's debts? Yes. And without the trust funds, we were bankrupt. My father suffered a massive stroke the day Blake's men evicted us. He died a week later in a rented room. Abigail wiped her face furiously with the back of her sleeve. Josie didn't just rob us, Wyatt. She orchestrated a masterclass in destruction. She played us against each other. She used Harrison Blake to wipe out her own family. The sheer scale of Josephine's betrayal was suffocating. She hadn't just run away. She had deliberately ruined the two people who loved her most, using them as scapegoats to cover her tracks. Why come looking for me now, Abby? Wyatt asked gently. After all this time, why ride all the way out to this forsaken territory to forgive us? Now. Ow. Abigail reached down and unbuckled the straps of her worn leather satchel. She reached inside and pulled out a crisp, folded piece of parchment. She slid it across the wooden table toward Wyatt. Because of this, she said. Wyatt cautiously picked up the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, sweeping, and uniquely Josie's. It was postmarked from Denver, Colorado, dated just 3 weeks ago. He unfolded it and read aloud. My dearest Abigail, I know you harbor anger in your heart, but I write to you with wonderful news. Wyatt and I have reconciled. We have seen the error of our ways and are building a new life together in Denver. Wyatt is truly a changed man. We wish to make amends, but we are in desperate need of the remaining secondary trust funds held in Mother's maiden name. Please, bring the papers to the Tremont House Hotel. Forgive us, Abby. Come to us. Wyatt dropped the letter as if it had burned his fingers. This is a trap. I know, Abigail said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I found out about Mother's secondary trust just 2 months ago. It's untouched, worth nearly $50,000. Josie must have found out about it too. But why would she use your name? Why claim she's with you in Denver? Wyatt stood up, pacing the small room, his mind racing. Because she needs a shield. If she's in Denver, in Harrison Blake's territory, she's in danger. Blake is a ruthless man. If Josie crossed him, or if she's trying to scam him out of more money, she needs a fall guy. She's using my name to draw you in, and she'll use my reputation as a violent drunk to take the blame when she steals that trust fund. Suddenly, Wyatt's 3 hounds outside erupted into a frenzy of vicious, snarling barks. Wyatt froze. He moved swiftly to the window, pulling the burlap curtain back just a fraction of an inch. Over the crest of the eastern ridge, cutting through the fading evening light, 3 riders were approaching the cabin. They weren't moving like lost travelers. They were fanned out in a tactical formation, holding lever-action rifles across their saddles. They wore long black dusters, the signature uniform of Harrison Blake's enforcers. Josie's lie hadn't just reached Abigail. It had reached the men hunting her. They had tracked the decoy. Wyatt turned back to Abigail, his eyes hardened into steel. He reached over to the table and grabbed his gun belt, buckling it swiftly around his waist. They found us, Wyatt said, drawing his Colt and checking the cylinder. Looks like your forgiveness is gonna have to wait, Abby. Right now, we just need to survive. The crack of a Winchester rifle split the twilight, followed instantly by the shattering of the cabin's single-glass window. Shards rained down on the dusty floorboards as Wyatt tackled Abigail, bearing her weight down beneath the heavy oak table. A barrage of lead tore through the thin, rotting timber of the walls, sending plumes of sawdust and splinters into the suffocating air. "Stay low," Wyatt roared over the deafening gunfire, pulling his Colt from its holster. Abigail didn't scream. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with a hardened resolve. She crawled out from under Wyatt's protective arms, scrambling across the floor covered in broken glass to retrieve the rifle she had left leaning near the doorway. She checked the chamber with a practiced, fluid motion that surprised him. "I didn't ride 3 weeks through outlaw country without learning how to use this," Abigail yelled back, reading the shock in his eyes. She pressed her back against the wall beside the shattered window frame, wiping a streak of dirt from her forehead. Outside, the 3 riders had dismounted, using the low stone wall of the corral as cover. Wyatt recognized the leader immediately by the silver conchos on his hatband. Beaumont, a notorious gun-for-hire who did Harrison Blake's dirtiest work. With him were 2 rough-looking drifters, Cordell and Hackett. "Wyatt Hayes," Beaumont's gravelly voice boomed across the yard, carrying over the howling Wyoming wind. "Send the girl out with the satchel, Mr. Marder. Blake ain't got no quarrel with a deadbeat dirt farmer. He just wants the Gallagher woman and the papers she's carrying." Wyatt threw a glance at Abigail. Her eyes widened as the chilling reality set in. Josie hadn't just used Wyatt's name to lure Abigail out. She had tipped off Harrison Blake's men to intercept her. It was a perfectly orchestrated ambush. Josie wanted her sister dead and the money secured without ever having to dirty her own hands. "If we give them the papers, they'll kill us both anyway to leave no witnesses," Wyatt muttered, his grip tightening on his revolver. "We have to break their line." Wyatt crept to the back door, a flimsy piece of pine hanging on rusted hinges. "Abby, when I count to 3, I need you to lay down, covering fire on the corral. Keep their heads down. I'm going to flank them through the root cellar doors." Abigail nodded, leveling the heavy barrel of the Winchester over the windowsill. 1, 2, 3. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked hard against her shoulder, unleashing a volley of rapid fire that chipped away at the stone corral. Beaumont and his men ducked, cursing loudly as bullets ricocheted off the rocks. In that split second, Wyatt kicked open the back door and dove into the fading light. He rolled through the tall, dry prairie grass, moving with the silent, lethal grace of a mountain lion. The hounds were still barking, adding to the chaotic din, masking the sound of his boots crushing the dry earth. He circled wide around the lean-to shed, flanking the enforcers from their blind side. Cordell peeked over the stone wall to take aim at the cabin window. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He fired, the Colt bucking in his hand. The shot took Cordell in the shoulder, spinning the man backward into the dirt with a howl of agony. "He's behind us," Hackett screamed, spinning around and firing blindly into the shadows of the shed. Wyatt dropped to a knee, fanning the hammer of his revolver. 2 more shots rang out in rapid succession. Hackett's rifle dropped from his hands as he crumpled to the ground, clutching his knee. Beaumont, realizing the tactical advantage was lost, cursed violently. He abandoned his wounded men, vaulting over the corral fence and sprinting toward his tethered horse. He leaped into the saddle and dug his spurs in, galloping wildly back up the eastern ridge, disappearing into the encroaching darkness. Silence descended on the Broken Spur Ranch, heavy and thick with the smell of sulfur and cordite. Wyatt stood up slowly, keeping his gun trained on the 2 groaning men in the dirt. The cabin door creaked open, and Abigail stepped out, the Winchester still raised, her chest heaving with adrenaline. Wyatt walked over to Hackett, who was writhing and cursing on the ground. He kicked the man's fallen rifle away and crouched down, grabbing Hackett by the lapels of his black duster. "Why did Blake send you after her?" Wyatt demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Speak fast, or I'll lead you out here for the wolves." Hackett coughed a desperate, pained sound. It wasn't just Blake. It was the woman, Josephine. Abigail stepped closer, the color draining from her face. "What about my sister?" Hackett let out a wet, rattling laugh. Sister, she don't care about you. She's marrying Harrison Blake in Denver on Saturday. A grand society wedding at the Tremont house. Blake told us to intercept you, take the trust papers as her dowry, and make sure you never made it to the city to object. Wyatt dropped the man, a cold, calculating fury settling into his bones. The pieces of the puzzle were finally, sickeningly clear. Josie had never been a victim. She had been working with Harrison Blake from the very beginning. She had married Wyatt merely to steal his land for Blake's empire, then framed him to steal her father's fortune, and now she was sealing the devil's bargain by marrying the Baron himself. Wyatt turned to look at Abigail. The exhaustion and grief that had weighed her down for 3 years seemed to vanish, replaced by a terrifying, icy clarity. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking, Wyatt?" she asked, her voice steady and hard. "I'm thinking Denver is a long ride," Wyatt said, holstering his gun. "But I think we can make it by Saturday." The journey south to Colorado was brutal, pushing the horses and themselves to the absolute limit. They rode from the desolate plains of Wyoming through the treacherous mountain passes, stopping only when the animals threatened to collapse. But as the miles vanished beneath their hooves, the invisible wall that had stood between Wyatt and Abigail began to crumble. Around flickering campfires beneath a canopy of stars, they talked. They talked about the life that was stolen from them, the dreams they had buried, and the lingering sting of betrayal. Wyatt found himself captivated not by the flashing, volatile energy he had once thought was love with Josie, but by Abigail's quiet brilliance, her sharp wit, and the undeniable strength that had carried her through hell. On the 4th night, huddled close for warmth against the bitter mountain chill, Wyatt reached out and gently traced the scar on Abigail's hand. "I was a blind fool, Abby," he whispered, his eyes meeting her storm-gray gaze. "I chased a mirage when the real thing was standing right in front of me all those years ago on your father's porch." Abigail didn't pull away. She turned her hand over, intertwining her fingers with his. "We were both deceived, Wyatt, but we aren't victims anymore. Tomorrow we take our lives back." By Friday evening, the sprawling, gas-lit metropolis of Denver rose before them. It was a city of immense wealth and desperate poverty, built on gold, silver, and ruthlessness. They left their exhausted horses at a livery stable on the edge of town and secured a cheap room in a boarding house to prepare. Saturday morning dawned crisp and bright. The Tremont House Hotel, a towering monument of Victorian architecture and velvet-draped luxury, was buzzing with the city's elite. Carriages lined the cobblestone streets, delivering politicians, cattle barons, and socialites to the wedding of the season, Harrison Blake and the wealthy, tragic heiress, Josephine Gallagher. Wyatt and Abigail didn't enter through the front doors. Armed with the layout information they had extracted from Hackett, whom they had turned over to a sympathetic federal marshal in Cheyenne, along with their testimonies, they slipped in through the bustling kitchen and up the service stairwell. They found the bridal suite on the 3rd floor. 2 armed guards stood outside the mahogany door, but Wyatt made quick work of them. A heavy brass candlestick from a hallway table and 2 swift, silent strikes left the men unconscious on the floral carpet. Wyatt kicked the double doors open. The room was a vision of excessive opulence. White lilies spilled from crystal vases and champagne chilled in silver buckets. Standing in the center of the room, adorned in a breathtaking gown of imported French silk and a fortune in stolen diamonds, was Josephine. Beside her stood Harrison Blake, adjusting a gold pocket watch, looking every inch the untouchable king. Josie spun around, her triumphant smile freezing into a mask of absolute horror. "Abby?" she gasped, the color draining from her perfectly powdered face. She looked at the tall, imposing figure beside her sister and took a trembling step back. "Wyatt?" Harrison Blake's hand darted toward his tailored coat, but Wyatt already had his Colt drawn and aimed squarely at the Baron's chest. "Don't even think about it, Blake," Wyatt said, his voice echoing like thunder in the lavish room. "Keep your hands where I can see them. What is the meaning of this?" Blake demanded, recovering his arrogant composure. "You have no idea who you are dealing with, dirt farmer." "Nah, eh." "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Wyatt replied smoothly. "A land thief, an extortionist, and a fool who trusted a viper." Abigail stepped forward, her riding boots sinking into the plush rug. She looked at her sister, truly looking at her for the first time in 5 years. The glamour and the silk couldn't hide the rot underneath. "You wrote to me, Josie," Abigail said softly, reaching into her coat and pulling out the letter. "You told me you were with Wyatt. You begged for my forgiveness and asked me to bring Mother's trust papers here." "I can explain, Abby," Josie stammered, tears springing to her eyes, flawlessly executing her victim routine. "He forced me. Harrison forced me to write it. He said he would kill me if I didn't get him the rest of the money." Blake scoffed loudly. "Shut your mouth, you foolish woman. I never told you to write to her." He glared at Wyatt. "She told me her sister was dead. She said the trust reverted to her automatically." "You see, Josie," Abigail said, a sad smile touching her lips, "you spun so many lies, you tangled yourself in the web. We know everything. We know about the forged deeds in Colorado. We know about the $200,000 you stole from Father leading to his death. And we know you sent Beaumont to murder me." Josie's facade shattered. The swaggering entrant replaced by a cornered, vicious animal. "You have nothing," she shrieked. "You have no proof. Harrison owns the judges in this town. You pull that trigger, Wyatt, and you both hang." "We don't need to pull the trigger," Wyatt said, lowering the hammer of his gun but keeping it aimed. "And we didn't go to the local judges." Right on cue, the heavy doors of the suite swung open again. 4 United States federal marshals stepped into the room, their badges gleaming against their coats, rifles at the ready. "Harrison Blake and Josephine Gallagher," the lead marshal announced, stepping past Wyatt. "You are both under arrest for mail fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and the attempted murder of Abigail Gallagher. We have the sworn confession of your man Hackett, the forged deed from the Colorado territory, and the fraudulent letter sent across state lines." Blake turned pale, his arrogant sneer vanishing as a marshal clamped heavy iron cuffs around his wrists. He glared with venomous hatred at Josie. "You clumsy, greedy idiot. You brought the feds down on us with a letter." Josie fought frantically as the marshals grabbed her arms, ruining her pristine silk gown. "No, you can't do this." "Abby, please, I'm your sister. I'm your blood. Don't let them take me." Abigail stood perfectly still, watching the marshals drag her sister toward the door. She felt no anger, no triumph, and no sorrow, only a profound, liberating emptiness. The ghost that had haunted her for years was finally gone. "I came all the way to Wyoming to forgive you, Josie," Abigail said quietly, her voice carrying over her sister's frantic screams. "And I do. But forgiveness doesn't mean you escape the consequences of your sins." "Nah, ah." As the heavy doors slammed shut behind the marshals, the room fell into a heavy, peaceful silence. Wyatt holstered his weapon and turned to Abigail. The sunlight streaming through the window caught the silver in his beard and the warmth returning to his eyes. "It's over," Wyatt said softly. Abigail stepped close to him, resting her hands on his chest. "No, Wyatt," she smiled, her storm gray eyes bright and clear. "It's just beginning." They left Denver 2 days later, not as a broken cowboy and a ruined heiress, but as partners. With the forged deeds annulled by the federal courts, Wyatt reclaimed his Colorado ranch. With the stolen funds recovered from Blake's vaults, Abigail restored her family's legacy. They built a new house in the valley, far from the shadows of deceit, surrounded by fertile land, strong horses, and a love forged in the fires of truth. The Wild West had tried to break them, but it only succeeded in making them whole. Thank you for riding along with us on this twisted frontier journey. If Wyatt and Abby's story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow story lovers. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you won't miss our next wild tale.